This is my first solo in English. I started producing these smaller episodes in the Greek Cypriot dialect because there was and always is so much going on in the world and in our little corner of the planet here in Cyprus. And while I love the storytelling and visual aspect I get to do on Instagram stories on the various issues I care about, for those of you who are new here, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram as Georgie's Mummy. I knew there was a gap in the audio and podcasting world that needed to be filled with a female perspective on things. Today, I am sharing one of those perspectives, one that I feel needs to be told in English. I know very, very little about the situation in the Middle East. I have not read a single book yet. And everything that I'm about to say is based on my view, which you could say is echoed by many others. But these are my conclusions that I have come to after spending a ridiculous amount of hours listening to debates, watching discussions and reading articles, posts and tweets, and as a person who spends an inordinate amount of time online due to the nature of my work. As a person who has no stake in this, no family in Gaza, no close Jewish friends, and no strong opinion prior to October 7, some of what I have to say you may like, you may love, or you may despise me for, and probably unfollow me on social media and never listen to the podcast again. While I hope that isn't true and you will stick around, as a journalist and someone who acknowledges full damn well how the online world works and how we, if not all of us, but a big majority of us, are living and interacting in this online world, I think it's massively important that we talk about it. Speaking as an outsider, a Westerner, as some may say, a privileged little bitch who posts and writes from the comfort of her peaceful home, I'm noticing a trend that I fear will have a tremendous and scary impact on us all if we don't de-radicalize and start acting on the behalf of humanity with empathy. Speaking about this topic is a risk I'm willing to take because I and others, I feel, need to make sense of these strange and, as someone said to me yesterday, dangerous times we are living in. This will be a both sides monologue because it simply cannot be any other way if we are to even begin to find a way out of this mess. During the last 3 or 4 years, and definitely during the last 6 to 7 months, I have become increasingly frustrated with the state of the world online. As someone who has studied journalism in the early 2000s and has always believed wholeheartedly in the mission of journalists, reporters, and writers, I find myself immensely disappointed. Unfortunately, my disappointment doesn't end there. It grows with every passing day I spend online, on the various platforms, some of which I genuinely love and owe so much to. My frustration seeps into my psyche with every hateful narrative I see, read, or listen to, and I resent the ones who should be doing their jobs, that thing they say they love, telling the truth, reporting on facts, away from bias and prejudice. They have let me down. They have let the world down. As for the rest of you, cosplaying as journalists, aka influencers, and many male podcasters, you too are just as guilty for muddying the waters. with your smart-ass tweets and your hate-fueled posts and your gotcha questions, which you know will hoist up those clicks and views, because nothing can compare to sensationalism and fear-mongering. No need for fact-checking. Just ask the British tabloid media who started this trend back in the 80s. The images from Gaza have reached us all. We've seen more dead babies and bodies than our parents and grandparents ever saw in their lifetime. Our children will probably see more. This is simply our reality. Must I accept this? Must you? Well, I and we don't really have a choice, do we? I could switch my phone off, tend to my kids, and pretend the world is a loving place. But apart from the fact that I am addicted to this form of communication, like most of you are, but probably few are willing to admit, I just want to ask, what the fuck is going on? The Middle East, a beautiful region with so much history, inhabited by some of the bravest and most resilient people with so much goodness in their hearts. This deserves better, period. If you've been following or listening to my work for a while now, then you will know that I have a heavy dislike for the far-right narrative and all its actors. Almost everything about it makes me cringe on the good days and scares the fuck out of me on the bad ones. Mentions of tradition, family values, and religion stir something inside of me that I have come to realize stems from the sneaky discrimination and normalized maltreatment of women and girls in our cultures, a reality that is for many, many of us all around the world. Some experience it more than others. However, it's always there in some form and expression. Religion, in my case Christianity, told me what to do and not do from a very young age. Family values were drummed into me as I grew older and needed to consider the fact that my life could be put on hold if I choose to have kids. And tradition put up a massive wall that I longed to climb to catch a glimpse of the other side, yet never could because I was told not to. Can I acknowledge the positive elements that all three of these ideologies may contain? Yes. Can I acknowledge the positive discipline that comes with conservatism, aka attempts to conserve something that works? Yes. But I am a progressive. I am a feminist. I know damn well that the reason I now sit in my studio wearing my crop top and tight jeans and makeup and working on projects that challenge misconceptions about women and LGBTQ people is because of some progressives in the past. Call them suffragettes or freedom fighters or rebels or revolutionaries. I believe in civil rights. I believe in change and improvement. I believe in social and economic justice. I believe in curbing political corruption. I believe in equality for all. All this could work if the people at the top wanted it to, but they don't. And what irks me even more, though, and demolishes my hope, is a possible conclusion that indicates that we, the people, may not want all this either. Segregation and division, racism and hate have become as normalized as the mistreatment and sexualization of women. Watching students being arrested and knowing that journalists are not allowed to enter Gaza and do their job is not normal and should absolutely be condemned and should be the center of protests, especially if you are genuinely into freedom of speech for all. And here's where my mission today starts in the context of the war, the conflict between Israel and Palestine. None, and I mean none, of the top players in this game want any of what I had just mentioned. Not Netanyahu and his government, not Hamas and its supporters. And if there are very, very few things I know about this whole situation, it's this. This is a fact. Deny this and we simply cannot have a discussion. How wonderful would it be if we could just acknowledge this reality? How wonderful would it be to be able, with the magical ability of being able to vote, to put those who want progress and peace in power and kick the rest to the curb? How wonderful would it be if we voted in leaders who operate with empathy, love, understanding, and compassion? I often wonder if Israel did not respond in the way it did after October 7, would we still be witnessing a rise in anti-Semitism? If Hamas did not do what it did on October 7, would we still be witnessing a rise in Islamophobia or Muslim and Arab phobia? The answer to that question is probably yes, because we all know the far right and anti-immigration vocalists, and we know that they have made this absolutely clear for ages now. But bang on all you want about the absolute destruction of Gaza and its people. But if you don't, for a second, understand and fully recognize the rise in Jew hate, you will get nowhere. And vice versa. You can bang on all you want about the rise in anti-Semitism, but if you don't acknowledge the thousands upon thousands of innocent lives that are being taken so horrifically in Gaza, you will get nowhere. From the endless hours of discussions and debates I have listened to and watched, rarely have I come across individuals with clear, unbiased, objective opinions on the matter, critical of both sides. Rarely do I see Netanyahu and Hamas being talked about in more or less the same manner. Yes, I realize one is labeled a sovereign democratic country, while the other is labeled a terrorist group. But few, so few of you are coming up with solutions and fighting for the right of the people. When you are speaking to a mainly Western audience whose knowledge on this struggle is very limited, I believe that this is how you must present it. Do not assume people know. Do not assume that they will all put their critical thinking caps on and suddenly become reasonable when they are being bombarded with images of dead babies, women being thrown in vans, and information being everywhere that very few people and humans are able to digest. When you are in pain, when you are injured and aching, when you have been through a pandemic, an economic collapse, and you are now witnessing basic human rights being rolled back, what do you expect? Attacking those in desperation and calling them names, labeling them and belittling them will not help. If you're going to jump online and share your opinion, think before you speak. Lead with understanding and practical solutions, or call for more thought leaders if you can't do it. Do not stir up the mob. We have plenty of stirrers, many of whom are called trolls, and they have created an absolutely disastrous world. In regards to what is happening at university campuses, which is the latest trope, the latest piece of information that is muddied through the social media and other media channels and may drastically change by the time this comes out, here's what I have to say. University campuses have, by nature, always been progressive and rebellious. Go back and take a look at the headlines over the decades and note how protesters have always been considered radical and hysterical, aggressive and threatening. But nothing, no change or progress has ever been made by just sitting around, negotiating, attending meetings, and making phone calls. Are these the realistic expectations we have from our youth? Because these people, many of whom naturally are younger and perhaps immature, one could argue, are prone to activism and demonstrations. They have always raised their voices and stood up against authoritarianism in almost every single context. Even during the heydays of the 90s when I was a teenager and the world was our oyster. How many demonstrations took place in the 60s during the civil rights protests and the war in Vietnam? Students were arrested for standing by their fellow black and gay mates and standing up against war. Look at what happened when Roe versus Wade was overturned. The thousands upon thousands who demonstrated bravely, ignoring the ridicule from the far right and the conservatives. This is not a new phenomenon. But what is new is that these actions are now being exaggerated and distorted via social media and wannabe journalists to further a message, to make a point about the pro-Palestine gatherings being made up of crazy people who want war and for the Islamic regime to come for tea, apparently. They're not even being called pro-Palestine protests anymore. They're called pro-Hamas or anti-Israel. How inflammatory is that? And what a disservice to the people of Palestine and the people of Israel. Mentions of leftism, the left, when these narratives and images pop up, are another infuriating part of the discussion. And this is probably and possibly where my patience blew up and I could not sit down and shut up any longer. I've gone back and forth on this, admitting that there is a form of extremism on the left, but acknowledging that it's also nowhere near as systematic as the far right. The extremism lies in the left's lack of awareness as to how hard it can be for humans to adapt to new realities, to grasp facts that they never thought possible. You could argue that when we are faced with the violations of basic human rights, then fuck you and your inability to grow and evolve, to process and digest new information, to not take time out to learn and unlearn a few things. But this isn't helping us. It's not being productive in any way. It's just served the far right and extremism, and that is, in part, one of the reasons why it's on the rise. Let's do a test. Think of a person who you know is on the far left. Now, think of one on the far right. Unfortunately, many come to my mind. The far left, in my opinion, is not something that I need to worry about right now. Everything else I mentioned is. Also, while we argue online about a flag, an article, a podcast discussion, and freedom of speech, people in Gaza are still being killed. They are still starving. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of my work has gone into criticizing the far right. So when I see or hear people blaming lefties and the left, painting a broad, mentally unstable picture of a side on the political spectrum that is now losing to fascists and oppressors like Trump, Meloni, Millet, Le Pen, Elam, aka Golden Dawn in our case, I can't help but wonder, do you know what you're doing? Do you know where you are pushing many regular people who do not live online and who cannot see nuance in this context, who have never read a single book in their lives, who are so binary in every possible way, who are racist and sexist. Am I saying we should never criticize the left? Of course not. We should. We should most definitely be criticizing them. But can't you see that when you say, I used to be on the left until it got hijacked by ideologists, ultimately translates to many people as a move to the right? And it's showing, we have evidence of it, the rise of the far right. I mean, where else is there for these binary thinking people to go? Paint the left as crazy and radical so you get more supporters on the right. With racism being normalized, and it is, this is not fear-mongering. What I'm saying now is not fear-mongering. It's real, and it's about to get worse. You stand with Israel because you are against the Islamic regime and Hamas. I get that. At the same time, though, you're pushing our societies to look exactly like that. Oppressive to women, LGBTQ people, minority groups, and anyone who dares to step out of the norm. Please learn to communicate your message better without risking our rights, which are already under threat. Abortion rights are literally being taken away. Women are forced to become mothers when they do not want to. The church is interfering in our lives and in our bodies. Affordable housing and access to healthy food is nowhere to be seen. Our youth is in trouble. The gender fucking pay gap is still there. Babies and women and young men are being killed, yet the left is the problem. I don't think it's productive in any way, shape or form to look at this picture and think that the people screaming and shouting and waving flags and closing down campuses are the problem. Do you see what I mean? I get you don't want the Islamic fucking regime, which is not just an ideology, it's a lifestyle and a dangerous one at that. And I know, I understand, you do not want this coming to our door. But I'm guessing that if you were to take all those protesters and ask them one by one if they would be cool with the idea of women being tortured and killed because of one strand of hair that was on display, and if they were indifferent to gay men being strung up and hanged, I'm guessing, and I'm going out on a limb here to say that especially if they are mostly lefties, they will not be at all okay with this. Some right-wing alpha male homophobes and misogynists might be, though. Extremism exists. Extreme rhetoric exists. Totally illogical approaches exist. And I'm sorry to tell you that they exist on both sides. So what are you telling me when you say Gaza is run by Hamas and the Islamic ideology is coming for us all? How does that help to stop the killing of thousands of children? How does that help the mothers who are having C-sections without anesthesia? What are you saying when you post reel upon reel, video upon video, and tweet upon tweet on how Hamas is a terrorist group? What are you saying? I don't care about Hamas, and I do not give a flying fuck about the IDF. As far as I'm concerned, they can all rot. We know about the Islamic regime. If anything, us Westerners who don't know shit have seen the women covered from head to toe, the litter of babies around her and the misogyny that follows her wherever she goes. We've heard the stories, we've seen the images. And if you don't know or you are choosing to ignore it, know this: they are fucking evil. The Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas are evil, and they do not give a fuck about their people, and they certainly don't give a fuck about you. I'm being probably very basic and insensitive, but it has to be said. Condemn Hamas and condemn the IDF. Setting aside the fact that we have seen images that are far too extreme for our brains to process, do you know what an absolute mindfuck it is to be scrolling on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and seeing these images and then seeing a debunked caption on the top? I mean, what? What is even real anymore? I'm not there. You're not there. How do I know what is real? But why are we arguing over who bombed a hospital? A hospital was bombed. That's the story. That is where you direct your frustration to the fact that a hospital, a space containing ill and sick people, was bombed. Why are we screaming at each other about families being killed in their homes and people being abducted? Families have been killed and people have been taken. That's the story. That is the reality. Trying to make sense of a world where these things exist and happen is a mindfuck. And instead of looking at systematically and structurally deconstructing these norms, we're at each other's throats because of a post. How do you know if and when Hamas is defeated? Is there a specific number? Do you have mugshots of every single member? You say they dress in civilian clothing. So how do you know who is who? Are the leaders of Hamas in Gaza? My point being, is there an end goal, dear Israel? What is it and where is it? And do you actually care about the hostages? Where is the evidence that you, Israel, care in the relentless and indiscriminate bombing? Why, dear Jewish voices online, do you not condemn your government for not giving two fucks as to whether the hostages are alive or dead? Why? Why are we not as critical of Zionism as we are of other ethno-nationalist ideologies and movements? Is the majority of the Israeli government not made up of far-right oppressors? Why are they let off the hook? Why are we discussing anti-Semitism when people are dying? Why are we discussing Islamophobia and Arab hate when kids are getting shot? You cannot get rid of Palestine and you cannot get rid of Israel. So what are we talking about? On my social media accounts, I talked about the lack of knowledge on the history of the Middle East. Someone replied to me saying, you don't need a history lesson to say that 10, 50, 100 kids a day being killed for 6 months straight is horrifying and needs to stop. Bombing 2 million people in an area smaller than Bafos and with nowhere to go, something that actually cannot be compared with any other conflict. Journalists have been killed, over 100 of them. Aid workers have been killed, again, over 100. Israel has kids in their prisons for throwing stones. Hostages have been tortured and shot, many of them missing, with their families dying of agony. As a mother of 3, I cannot even begin to imagine the pain parents on both sides are experiencing right now. So many mothers messaging me to say they worry about their kids' futures. And so many younger women saying, this is the world you want me to bring kids into? And then the far right wonders why women don't want kids and why we have low birth rates. I was afraid to even go anywhere near this issue on my social media channels. I kept writing words and then deleting them. And I know many content creators and regular people who have done and are still doing the same. even after posting the first story where I focused on the online narrative, which is more or less the line I have kept during this monologue, I was terrified that someone would pop into my DMs and say, I don't care about that person or that person or that side, that they would call me racist for using the wrong terminology or phrase, or someone would pick up on an unconscious bias that I have that has never been addressed. However, not only did that never happen, I actually got the chance to exchange messages with a variety of people who sensibly explained their positions and their own fears. And I noticed something. Many with whom I have interacted with over the past few weeks and days could have easily been dismissed as extremely biased based on their posts and their likes. Oh, you like that person's post. That means you are on that side. That means you don't like that group of people. Oh, you get your news from that media outlet, so that means that you support that. No, that's not what it means. The one thing I have most definitely learned, and it would be really cool if a lot of you did too, is that humans are messy and nuanced and emotional, and they have their own experiences, and they interpret situations in a different way, in a multitude of ways, actually. I read messages from someone who identifies as a lefty, but was intensely critical of the left, indicating clearly and soberly how they fucked up. I listened to messages from someone who I have never seen post a single word for the people of Palestine, yet the hostages were a big deal to them. I listened to how they described their emotional state, the frustration they felt, how they understood that few people care about those fathers, mothers, children, and friends that went into the abyss on October 7 and never came back. Why is that wrong? Is it not peace that we want? Is it not justice that we want? Is it not humanity that we care about? Is it not fighting the big and powerful guys that we care about? Is it not the men in the suits who have made us so cynical, so oriented, so brainwashed? The ones who have had so much power for so long. The ones that have created a structure of hate and division. Aren't they the ones who should be on the receiving end of our anger?